The reason that I decided to fly to China for an extended hands-on with Phantom Blade Zero, and the reason I'm so excited for it, is that the developer S-Game has a broader ambition for it than just another character action game, with a Dark Souls-like interconnected world to explore, yet combat that isn't really trying to follow From Software's house style. Hey there, I'm Wes Fenlon, I'm a senior editor at PCGamer, and I've recently returned from a trip around the world to Beijing in China, where I spent a weekend playing the upcoming action game Phantom Blade Zero, which is rapidly climbing the ranks of my most anticipated games for next year. PCGamer once declared that video game toilets can tell you a lot about the priorities of a game and the people making it, but I would argue that virtual ladders have even more to say than commodes. Just think about all the annoying ladders you run into in games over the years. If you approach it from the top, would it magnetize your character to it? All of these little details say something about the character you're controlling and how clumsy or empowered the game's developers wanted you to feel when you press some buttons. Which is why I immediately noticed that the protagonist of upcoming Kung Fu Punk action game Phantom Blade Zero doesn't really respect how ladders are normally supposed to work. Like, at all. And if you'll just stick with me on this ladder thing for a second, I do think it actually says a lot about this game. See, by the time your Kung Fu character Soul leaps onto a ladder, he's already halfway to the top, and instead of using the rungs to climb like a normal person, he springs upwards, barely touching every third or fourth step. The point is, Phantom Blade Zero wants to make every single thing you do in this game look cool, even if it's something as normally mundane as climbing a ladder. And every step that you skip is like a second that you can spend chopping somebody's head off instead with an exquisitely animated flourish. It has the flair of a game like Devil May Cry, but the reason that I decided to fly to China for an extended hands-on with Phantom Blade Zero, and the reason I'm so excited for it, is that the developer S-Game has a broader ambition for it than just another character action game, with a Dark Souls-like interconnected world to explore, yet combat that isn't really trying to follow From Software's house style. The game's director, who goes by the handle Soulframe, straight up told me that he thinks there are actually too many Souls-like games out there, and despite some similarities, Phantom Blade is not going to be one of them. So his analogy was really interesting. He said that back in the 60s and 70s, performers like Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee created a new genre that incorporated some Hollywood filmmaking as well as traditional Chinese opera. We don't call those action movies though, we call them kung fu movies. They are distinct. And that's the subgenre that he wants to put his own stamp on in video games, by taking some elements from RPGs and Souls games, and some elements from Japanese character action games like Devil May Cry, but prioritizing the look and feel of Chinese martial arts above all. But okay, that is a lot of big picture talk. So what does it mean for how this game actually plays? Well, the demo that I was there for didn't let me see nearly as much of Phantom Blade Zero's world as I wanted to, but it was still enough to strengthen my conviction that this is the game I wanted last year's Black Myth Wukong to be, with much more interesting level design to traverse, backing up some swordplay that absolutely rips. So, let me talk about the combat first. All 8 of the weapons that I got to try in Phantom Blade Zero were cool, but I absolutely loved a few of them, like Seamless Death, which is a pair of circular blades that turned me into a Tasmanian whirlwind with a few button taps. Overall, my favorite was probably the Juggernaut, though, which is a massive blade with a unique mechanic that charged up its power as I parried attacks, and then did extra damage when I dropped a heavy swing. All of the weapons in the game have kind of at the start just a small handful of combos built from normal and heavy attacks, which is obviously distinct from the dozens of granular combos that you get in like a Capcom or a Platinum action game. But that relative simplicity seems quite well judged, because there's going to be something like 30 weapons in the full game, and many of them had their own mechanics like the Juggernaut. So another blade in the demo, the Soft Snake Sword, has its own special parry ability that saps enemies of more stamina when you parry with it than just the standard parry, for example. And the simpler combos for these weapons are kind of key to the elaborate animations behind even just a string of basic hits. Your character is constantly pirouetting between swings or rearing back on one foot to deliver a thrust, and these animations take a bit longer to play out than the individual interruptible attacks that you would expect from most Souls games. And this was a deliberate choice from the developers, so that they could make every movement look fluid. It didn't take me long to get used to these more elaborate attacks because Phantom Blade Zero is still plenty responsive where it really needs to be, in dodging, blocking, and parrying, which all play into enemies' kind of color-coordinated special moves in combat. So blocking a blue brutal attack will take a huge chunk of your Sha Chi or stamina gauge, but if you parry it, you'll then perform a stylish ghost step move behind them and then just start laying into them. Similarly, red killer attacks cannot be blocked or parried at all, and obviously they'll hurt really bad if they hit you, but if you dodge them with that same last second timing as a parry, that'll also trigger a ghost step, put you in an advantageous position. So the timing is easier to land than like a parry in Sekiro would be, even on the harder Hellwalker difficulty in Phantom Blade Zero, but that was another deliberate choice from the developers. The more generous parry window is there to let an experienced player keep the action flowing like a perfectly choreographed fight scene. So the game's combat director told me that their focus is on delivering that dance of well-orchestrated kung fu. If you want to just muddle your way through the hard mode, yeah, you can do that, and it's not going to be that stiff of a challenge compared to some Souls games. The difficulty is in playing beautifully, and when you're in that flow state, it's truly hard to spot the moment that one animation transitions from an attack to a block or a parry into a combo. S-Game has proudly proclaimed that it's motion capturing real martial artists for everything in Phantom Blade Zero, and I get how that kind of just sounds like a good marketing line. I mean, games have been doing motion capture for decades. Capcom used it for Devil May Cry 3 20-something years ago. But where it feels special in this case is that you can see the human performances everywhere in combat, not just in cutscenes or like finishing moves. When you parry an enemy's spear thrust, for example, by ripping it from their hands, spinning it around, and jabbing it back into their chest, the whole sequence was clearly captured by two performers working to get that dance just right, down to the tiny details like how they shuffle their feet. The flow from one move into the next might actually be breaking new ground in game animation. I'm not a game developer, I can't say for sure, but at least it feels impressive to me in the same way that the very first trailer for Assassin's Creed struck me 20 years ago when it showed Altair pushing and twisting his way through crowds of NPCs. Really, there's so much to talk about with Phantom Blade's combat, but you can get a feel for how fluid it is by watching it. Harder to get a sense for in this video is the world around it, and the one area that I got to play through in this demo did go a long way towards at least making me think this is closer to an action-adventure game than the very linear on-rails sequence of mobs and then boss fights and then mobs and then boss fights that I found pretty disappointing in Black Myth Wukong. I don't mind that kind of setup for a game where I really love the combat like Devil May Cry 5, but Phantom Blade Zero is clearly going for something more elaborate here. So the part of the world I got to explore, with a sequence of walkways built into this narrow gorge high up in the air, was pretty simple by Dark Souls standards. It's not exactly like a castle labyrinth, but it did feature a number of promising branching paths that I was blocked off from exploring, and then several little corners and places to backtrack I did find that offered some kind of upgrade material or other goodies. There are also pathways that you can only open up by acquiring certain secondary weapons, like huge sledgehammer you get from defeating a mini-boss. This is basically like video game progression 101 stuff, but it is still catnip for me in a game that has an interconnected world that's going to let me revisit areas and find new rewards in them as I progress through the game. One of the things I'm particularly excited about with Phantom Blade Zero's balance between the action and the RPG is that you're going to be getting stronger by accruing weapons, powering them up, and finding items that increase your health and stamina gauges. This is perhaps the most blatantly obvious way that Phantom Blade Zero is not a Souls-like. There is no XP. Considering how many AAA games have leaned towards kind of like RPG-light numberifying everything in recent years, I find this a very refreshing and welcome choice. I know I've broadly said that the world here is kinda like Dark Souls though, which probably isn't the best way to convey or back up my argument that Phantom Blade Zero is not a Souls-like. So here are some other ways that it is avoiding that formula. Since there is no XP, there are no souls to pick back up or risk losing when you die. You just get to restart at a checkpoint. Enemies don't respawn each time you save at a checkpoint either, though they will apparently respawn if you leave a zone entirely. Regular enemies do not drop their weapons or loot the way they do in RPGs. The menus, control mapping, and so on aren't really following the From Software style that so many games have cribbed from. And along those same lines, though I only saw a small bit of the game, I don't think Phantom Blade Zero is going to relegate most of its storytelling to item descriptions and cryptic lore stuff. And the last one, the big one honestly, it has difficulty options, and even Hellwalker does not feel as hard as, say, one of the Nioh games. Again, being punishing really isn't this game's goal. So it took me about 90 minutes to play through this limited slice of one zone in Phantom Blade Zero, though I ran through the demo 3 more times on Hellwalker and did it much faster each time as I got better at the game. Honestly, I was having a blast, and I think it's really, really promising. Obviously, it's not the first game to ever pull from Chinese martial arts or Chinese history, but I don't think a game has ever come close to letting you fight with that operatic flourish that you see in great films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I honestly think it has a strong chance to be one of the biggest action games of next year. So the one question mark over all this is the storytelling at this point, and I barely got a sense for that. While it did sound natural in Chinese, English voice acting really did not sound natural. It sounded kind of terrible, to be blunt.
Please, help Allied Justice. Those Allied Justice disciples I've seen, they're no longer.
And the script clearly stood out as something needing a more naturalistic localization pass to work well in English. That's always going to be a challenge, I think, when you're dealing with names and references pulled from a different culture, pulled from mythology, but I hope it's one area that developers really focus on before calling the game finished. So Phantom Blade Zero doesn't have an official release date yet, but I feel pretty confident that we'll be playing it sometime in 2026. But that's it for me for today. Again, I'm Wes from PCGamer. Stick around the PCGamer YouTube channel and check out PCGamer.com for more on Phantom Blade Zero. And you might want to check out the next issue of PCGamer magazine, because I'm going to have even more on the game in there.